After his marriage collapsed, Lucas Reed became the office punchline. They said he was the kind of man who couldn't keep a flame alive, too dry and closed off for anyone to want a second date. One Friday night, his co-workers invited him to dinner and secretly arranged a blind date for fun. They whispered that the woman was so ugly no one could stand to look at her, then hid in the restaurant waiting for the moment Lucas would be humiliated. But when the door opened and she walked in, the entire restaurant went silent. In the end, who was really being made a fool? Lucas Reed sat at his desk on a Thursday afternoon, pretending to review a spreadsheet, while the voices around him blurred into background noise. He had worked at the same marketing firm for nearly 12 years, long enough to recognize the rhythm of the office gossip without listening to the words. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead mixed with the occasional burst of laughter from the break room, where his co-workers spent more time than they did working. He kept his head down and his coffee mug full, hoping that if he stayed quiet enough, they would forget he existed. It hadn't always been this way. Before the divorce, Lucas had been the kind of guy people invited to happy hour without thinking twice. He told decent jokes, showed up to birthday parties, remembered people's kids' names. But after his wife left 3 years ago, something shifted. The invitations stopped feeling genuine. The jokes turned sharp. He became the guy they talked about instead of the guy they talked to. They called him a failure in love, a man who let his marriage fall apart because he was too boring, too emotionally unavailable, too something. He stopped trying to correct them. It was easier to let them believe whatever version of him made them feel better about their own lives. By Friday morning, Lucas had almost forgotten about the invitation. His co-worker Derek had mentioned it in passing the day before, something about dinner at a new Italian place downtown. Lucas assumed it was one of those polite gestures people made when they didn't actually want you to say yes. But when Derek stopped by his desk again just before lunch, he was insistent. "You're coming tonight, right?" Derek asked, leaning against the cubicle wall with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was the kind of guy who wore expensive watches and talked too loud. The kind who thrived on being the center of attention. Lucas had never trusted him, but he had never been able to pinpoint why. Lucas glanced up from his computer screen and shrugged. "I don't know. I've got my daughter this weekend. I should probably get home." Derek waved a hand dismissively. "Come on, man. One dinner. We never see you anymore. It'll be good for you to get out." He lowered his voice, leaning in slightly. "Besides, we might have a little surprise for you." Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Surprises from Derek were never good. But before he could come up with an excuse, 2 more co-workers appeared behind Derek. Jessica from accounting and Ryan, who worked in sales. They both wore the same forced smiles, the kind people use when they're trying too hard to seem casual. "We already made a reservation," Jessica said, her voice bright and overly cheerful. 7 o'clock. You have to come." Lucas looked at the 3 of them standing there, blocking his exit, and realized he didn't have the energy to argue. He had spent the last 3 years saying no to everything, retreating further into himself with every rejection. Maybe they were right. Maybe it would be good for him to get out, even if it meant enduring a few hours of awkward small talk and thinly veiled pity. "Fine," he said quietly. "I'll be there." Derek clapped him on the shoulder, a little too hard. "That's the spirit. Trust me, tonight's going to be unforgettable." Lucas watched them walk away, already regretting his decision. He could hear them whispering as they turned the corner, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Something about the way they looked at each other made his skin crawl, but he pushed the feeling aside. He was being paranoid. They were just trying to be nice. The rest of the day dragged. Lucas tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting to the dinner. He imagined sitting at a table surrounded by people who barely knew him, forcing himself to laugh at their jokes and pretend he was having a good time. It sounded exhausting. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, he considered calling Derek and canceling, but his phone buzzed with a text before he could make up his mind. It was from Jessica. "Don't forget, 7 sharp and dress nice. You never know who you might meet." Lucas stared at the message for a long moment, trying to decode the meaning behind it. The last sentence felt deliberate, like she was hinting at something. He typed out a response asking what she meant, then deleted it. Whatever they had planned, he would find out soon enough. He went home and changed into a clean button-down shirt and dark jeans, the kind of outfit that felt acceptable without trying too hard. His daughter was with her mother this weekend, so the apartment felt emptier than usual. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment, studying his reflection. He looked tired, older than his 43 years. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and his hair had started to gray at the temples. He wondered if this was what people saw when they looked at him now, a man who had given up. The restaurant was in a part of town Lucas rarely visited, the kind of place with valet parking and soft jazz playing in the background. He arrived a few minutes early and stood outside for a moment, debating whether to turn around and go home. Through the windows, he could see Derek and the others, already seated at a large table near the back. They were laughing about something, their heads close together like they were sharing a secret. Lucas took a breath and walked inside. The hostess greeted him with a polite smile and led him toward the table. As he approached, the conversation stopped abruptly. Derek looked up and waved him over, his grin wide and predatory. "There he is," Derek said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby tables. "We were starting to think you bailed on us." Lucas slid into the empty seat across from him, feeling the weight of their stares. Jessica sat to his left, Ryan to his right. There were 2 other co-workers he barely knew at the far end of the table, both watching him with the same barely contained amusement. "So," Derek said, leaning back in his chair, "we have some news. We set you up on a little blind date tonight." Lucas felt his chest tighten. "What?" Jessica leaned in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We know it's been hard for you since the divorce. We just thought it might be nice for you to meet someone new." Lucas looked around the table, searching for any sign that this was a joke. But their expressions were serious, almost eager. He opened his mouth to protest, but Derek cut him off. "She's on her way now. Should be here any minute." He exchanged a glance with Ryan, and something unspoken passed between them. "Don't worry. We made sure she's your type." The way he said it made Lucas's stomach turn. He didn't know what they meant, but he knew it wasn't good. He could feel the trap closing around him, but he didn't know how to escape without making a scene. So he sat there, staring down at the menu in front of him, and waited for whatever humiliation they had planned to unfold. The minutes crawled by like hours. Lucas sat rigid in his chair, hands folded on the table in front of him, trying to ignore the way Derek kept checking his phone and smirking. The others had ordered drinks, their voices growing louder with each passing minute. But Lucas couldn't bring himself to touch the water glass in front of him. His throat felt dry, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wanted to leave. He should leave. But something kept him pinned to his seat. Some stubborn refusal to give them the satisfaction of watching him run. Jessica leaned closer, her perfume sharp and cloying. "You're not nervous, are you?" she asked, her tone mockingly sweet. "She's really nice. We wouldn't set you up with just anyone." Lucas didn't answer. He could hear the lie in her voice, see it in the way her eyes flickered toward Derek for approval. This wasn't about being nice. This was about entertainment. He was the punchline to a joke he hadn't been told yet, and everyone at the table was in on it, except him. Ryan nudged him from the other side, grinning. "Come on, man. Loosen up. When's the last time you even went on a date?" Lucas turned to look at him, his expression flat. "I don't see how that's any of your business." The smile on Ryan's face faltered for just a second before he recovered. Raising his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm just saying. It's been a while, right? You're probably out of practice." He glanced at Derek, who was barely containing his laughter. Don't worry. We made sure she's easy to talk to." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Lucas understood now. They hadn't set him up with someone nice. They had set him up with someone they thought was beneath him, someone they could mock. And when she arrived, they would sit back and watch him squirm, documenting every awkward moment for their own amusement. He could already imagine the photos, the group chat messages, the laughter echoing through the office on Monday morning. Derek's phone buzzed, and he glanced down at the screen, his grin widening. "She's here," he announced, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Everyone act natural." Lucas felt his stomach drop. He turned slightly in his seat, just enough to see the entrance. The hostess was walking toward their section, her hand gesturing to someone behind her. Lucas braced himself for the humiliation, his fingers gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He told himself he would stay calm. He wouldn't let them see how much this hurt. He would sit through the dinner, smile politely, and never speak to any of them again. But when the woman stepped into view, everything stopped. She wasn't what they had promised. She wasn't what anyone had expected. She was tall, with dark hair that fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and she moved with the kind of quiet confidence that made people turn their heads without realizing why. Her dress was simple, elegant. The kind of thing that didn't try too hard but still looked effortless. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on their table, and then she started walking toward them. Lucas heard someone at the table suck in a sharp breath. He didn't know who. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She wasn't just beautiful. She was the kind of beautiful that didn't need validation, the kind that existed independent of anyone's opinion. And she was walking straight toward him. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. A waiter stopped mid-step, his tray tilting slightly in his hand. Even the soft jazz playing in the background felt suddenly too loud. Lucas could feel the shift in the air, the way everyone at his table had gone completely still. Derek's smirk had frozen on his face. Jessica's mouth hung slightly open. Ryan looked like he had been slapped. The woman stopped at the edge of their table and looked directly at Lucas. Her expression was calm, unreadable. "You must be Lucas," she said, her voice low and steady. Lucas managed to nod, his throat too tight to form words. She extended her hand, and he took it without thinking, her grip firm and warm. "I'm Claire Morgan," she said. "I believe we're supposed to be having dinner." Behind her, Lucas could see Derek scrambling to recover, his face flushed. He stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his drink. "Claire, hi. We didn't expect you to be so punctual." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Lucas felt a grim satisfaction at the sound of it. Claire turned to look at Derek, her expression polite but distant. "I don't like being late," she said simply. Then she turned back to Lucas. "Should we sit?" Lucas realized he was still holding her hand. He let go quickly, heat rising to his face, and gestured to the empty seat beside him. Claire slid into the chair with the same effortless grace she had walked in with, and Lucas found himself hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. She smelled faintly of jasmine, and something else he couldn't name, something clean and fresh that made the air feel less suffocating. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lucas could feel the weight of every stare in the restaurant pressing down on him. He glanced around the table and saw the shock written plainly on their faces. Jessica looked like she had swallowed something bitter. Ryan was staring at Claire like he couldn't quite believe she was real. And Derek. Derek was desperately trying to regain control of the situation, his eyes darting between Claire and the rest of the group. "So," Derek said, forcing a laugh that came out too loud. "Claire, how do you two know each other again?" Claire folded her hands on the table and looked at him with an expression that gave nothing away. "We don't," she said evenly. "I was told this was a blind date, that someone wanted to meet me." Derek's smile twitched. "Right. Yeah. That's what we set up. We thought it would be fun." The word hung in the air like a threat. Claire tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Fun for who?" she asked. The question landed like a knife between the ribs. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it again, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. Jessica tried to jump in, her voice too bright, too frantic. "We just thought it would be nice for Lucas to meet someone. He's been so isolated lately. We were trying to help." Claire turned her gaze to Jessica, and Lucas saw something flicker in her eyes. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. "Help," she repeated, as if testing the word. "That's generous of you." Lucas felt the tension ratcheting tighter with every word. He didn't know what Claire was thinking, but he could see the cracks forming in the facade his co-workers had built. They had expected someone they could mock, someone who would be too intimidated or too desperate to push back. But Claire wasn't playing their game. She was dismantling it piece by piece, with nothing more than her presence and a few carefully chosen words. Ryan, who had been silent since Claire arrived, finally found his voice. "So, Claire, what do you do?" he asked, his tone trying for casual and missing by a mile. Claire glanced at him briefly. "I'm an architect," she said. "I design commercial buildings, mostly office spaces." Ryan nodded like this was fascinating information, though Lucas could see the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how to regain the upper hand. "That's cool. Must be a tough field you must work with a lot of interesting people." Claire's expression didn't change. "I do," she said. Then she turned to Lucas, effectively cutting Ryan out of the conversation. "What about you? What do you do?" Lucas felt his throat tighten again. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. "I work in marketing," he said quietly. "Nothing as impressive as architecture." Claire smiled for the first time since she had arrived. And the effect was startling. It softened her entire face, made her look younger, warmer. "I doubt that," she said. "Marketing is harder than people think. You have to understand what people want before they even know they want it." Lucas felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't attraction, not exactly. It was recognition. The way she spoke, the way she looked at him like he was a person worth listening to, not a project to be fixed or a joke to be laughed at. It disarmed him completely. Before he could respond, Derek's phone buzzed again. He glanced down at it, and Lucas saw his expression darken. He stood abruptly, motioning to Jessica and Ryan. "We need to go check on something," he said, his voice tight. "We'll be right back." Lucas watched them walk toward the far corner of the restaurant. Their heads bent together in urgent conversation. He could see them glancing back at the table, at Claire, their faces a mixture of confusion and barely concealed panic. Whatever plan they had concocted was falling apart, and they didn't know how to fix it. Claire watched them go, then turned back to Lucas. "They seem interesting," she said, her tone carefully neutral. Lucas let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "That's one word for it." She studied him for a moment, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Do you know why they really set this up?" she asked. Lucas felt his stomach twist. He had suspected, of course, but hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way he hadn't been ready for. "I have an idea," he said quietly. Claire nodded slowly. "So do I." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting toward the corner where Derek and the others were still huddled together. "I got a call from a woman named Jessica 2 days ago. She said she had a friend who was recently divorced, someone who needed a confidence boost. She made it sound like a charity case." Her eyes flicked back to Lucas. "I'm guessing that's you." Lucas felt heat creeping up his neck. "Yeah," he said. "That's me." Claire's expression softened slightly. "They told me you were shy, awkward. that you hadn't dated in years and probably wouldn't know what to say. She tilted her head. They didn't tell me you were sitting at a table full of people who clearly hate you. The bluntness of her words startled him. He opened his mouth to defend them, then stopped, because she was right. They did hate him, in the quiet, insidious way people hate anything that reminds them of their own failures. He had been the target of their cruelty for so long that he had stopped seeing it for what it was. "I'm sorry," Lucas said finally. "I didn't know they were going to do this. If I had, I wouldn't have come." Claire looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." She glanced toward the corner again, where Derek was now gesturing animatedly, his voice rising just enough to be audible over the music. They did. Lucas followed her gaze and saw the moment Derek's eyes met his. There was something ugly in that look, something desperate and vindictive. And in that moment, Lucas understood. This wasn't just about humiliating him, it was about proving something to themselves, about reaffirming their place in the social hierarchy by tearing him down. And now that their plan had backfired, they didn't know what to do. Claire stood suddenly, smoothing her dress. Lucas felt his heart sink, assuming she was about to leave. But instead, she looked down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I was going to walk out," she said. "I don't like being used as a prop in someone else's joke." Lucas nodded, unable to speak. "But," Claire continued, her voice quieter now, "I think that would give them exactly what they want. So I'm going to stay, and I'm going to have dinner with you. Not because they set this up, but because I want to." Lucas stared at her, his mind struggling to catch up. "Why?" he asked. Claire sat back down, meeting his eyes directly. "Because you're the only person at this table who hasn't lied to me tonight." The silence that followed Claire's words felt different from the one before. It wasn't heavy with anticipation or thick with malice. It was clean, almost peaceful. Lucas sat across from her, trying to process what had just happened. She had seen through the entire setup in a matter of minutes, had called it out without flinching, and then had chosen to stay anyway. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. He didn't know what to say. Every response that came to mind felt inadequate, too small for the moment. So he simply nodded, and Claire seemed to understand. She picked up her menu, her movements unhurried, and began scanning the options as if they were the only two people in the room. From the corner of the restaurant, Lucas could still see Derek and the others huddled together. Their voices had dropped to whispers, but their body language screamed frustration. Jessica kept glancing back at the table, her expression somewhere between disbelief and rage. Ryan had his phone out, probably texting someone who wasn't there, trying to make sense of what had gone wrong. And Derek looked like a man watching his carefully constructed plan crumble in real time. Lucas felt something shift inside him. For 3 years, he had let these people define him. He had accepted their judgment, internalized their mockery, and allowed himself to become exactly what they said he was. A failure. A man who couldn't keep his marriage together, who couldn't move on, who couldn't be worth anyone's time. But sitting here now, with Claire across from him and his co-workers scrambling to salvage their joke, Lucas realized something. They weren't laughing at him because he was pathetic. They were laughing because it made them feel powerful, and he had been giving them that power for far too long. Claire looked up from her menu. "The risotto looks good," she said, her tone conversational. "Have you been here before?" Lucas shook his head. "No. First time." She smiled slightly. "Me too." Jessica made it sound like this place was special, like it was the kind of restaurant you take someone when you're trying to impress them. She set the menu down. I'm starting to think she just wanted somewhere public enough that whatever happened would have an audience. Lucas felt a humorless laugh escape his throat. "That sounds about right." Claire studied him for a moment. her gaze steady and direct. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas tensed, bracing himself. "Sure." "Why did you come tonight?" she asked. "You must have known something was off. People don't usually spring blind dates on their coworkers, unless they're up to something." Lucas looked down at his hands, trying to find the right words. "I did know," he admitted. "Or at least I suspected. But I came anyway because I'm tired of running. I've been running from everything since my divorce. From people, from conversations, from anything that might make me feel something." He looked up at her. "I thought if I could just sit through one more humiliation, maybe it would stop hurting. Maybe I'd finally be numb enough that nothing they said could touch me." Claire's expression softened, but there was no pity in it, just understanding. "And is that what you want?" she asked. "To be numb?" Lucas considered the question. A week ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. But sitting here now, feeling the weight of her attention, the genuine curiosity in her eyes, he wasn't so sure. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I used to think it was. But I'm starting to realize that being numb doesn't make you safe. It just makes you invisible." Claire nodded slowly. "I know that feeling," she said. "After my father died, I spent 2 years trying to disappear. I stopped seeing friends, stopped taking on new projects, stopped doing anything that might require me to be present. I thought if I could just make myself small enough, the grief wouldn't be able to find me." She looked away, her gaze distant. "But it doesn't work that way. The pain finds you anyway. And when it does, you're alone." Lucas felt something crack open in his chest. He had expected tonight to be another exercise in endurance, another test of how much humiliation he could absorb before breaking. But this conversation, this moment of raw honesty with a complete stranger, was something else entirely. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Before he could respond, the waiter appeared at their table. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with the kind of practiced smile that service industry workers perfected over time. "Good evening," he said, his eyes flickering between Lucas and Claire. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Claire ordered a glass of red wine. Lucas asked for water, then changed his mind and ordered a beer. Something about the night felt like it required more than water. The waiter nodded and disappeared, and Lucas realized that Derek and the others were making their way back to the table. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but Lucas could see the tension in their movements, the way they avoided looking directly at Claire. Derek sat down heavily, his forced smile back in place. "Sorry about that," he said, addressing the table at large. "Had to take care of some work stuff." No one believed him. Claire certainly didn't. She turned to him with the same polite detachment she had shown earlier. "I hope everything's all right," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't actually care. Derek's smile faltered. "Yeah, fine." He glanced at Lucas, then at Claire, clearly searching for some way to reassert control. "So, how are you two getting along?" "Finding plenty to talk about?" Lucas felt anger flare in his chest, not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder and more deliberate. He had spent 3 years swallowing his anger, letting it fester inside him until it turned into shame. But tonight, sitting across from a woman who had seen through their cruelty in minutes and chosen to stand with him anyway, Lucas didn't want to swallow it anymore. He set his hands flat on the table and looked directly at Derek. "Actually," he said, his voice steady, "we're having a great conversation. Better than anything I've had with anyone at this table in years." Derek blinked, caught off guard. Jessica started to say something, but Lucas kept going. "I know what you did tonight," he said, his words measured and deliberate. "I know you set this up to embarrass me. You wanted to watch me fail, wanted to turn my life into entertainment so you could all feel better about yourselves." He looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "And I let you. For 3 years, I let you treat me like I was less than human because I thought I deserved it. Because my marriage fell apart, and I didn't know how to put myself back together." The restaurant had gone quiet again. Lucas could feel eyes on him from nearby tables. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. He wasn't performing for an audience. He was reclaiming something he had lost. "But I'm done," he continued. "I'm done being your punchline. I'm done apologizing for existing. And I'm done pretending that any of you are my friends." Derek's face had turned a mottled shade of red. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Jessica looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Ryan was staring at his phone, refusing to look up. The other 2 co-workers Lucas barely knew had already started gathering their things, clearly ready to leave. Claire sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Lucas couldn't tell if she was impressed or mortified or somewhere in between. But when she finally spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "I think Lucas and I would prefer to have dinner alone," she said, looking directly at Derek. "If you don't mind." It wasn't a request, it was a dismissal, and everyone at the table knew it. Derek stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "We were leaving anyway." He looked at Lucas with something that might have been anger, or might have been wounded pride. "You know what, Reed? You're right. You're not worth our time." Lucas met his gaze without flinching. "I know," he said quietly. "I haven't been for a long time. But neither are you." The words hung in the air for a moment, final and irrevocable. Then Derek turned and walked toward the exit, the others trailing behind him like a retreating army. Lucas watched them go, feeling the weight that had been pressing down on him for years begin to lift. It wasn't gone entirely. That kind of damage didn't heal overnight. But for the first time in a long time, he could breathe without feeling like he was drowning. When they were gone, Claire picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip. "That was brave," she said. Lucas let out a shaky breath. "That was terrifying." She smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "Those 2 things aren't mutually exclusive." The waiter returned with their drinks, his expression carefully neutral, despite having witnessed the entire exchange. He took their orders, Claire choosing the risotto she had mentioned earlier, Lucas ordering the first thing on the menu that looked appealing. When the waiter left, Lucas realized his hands were shaking. He wrapped them around his beer glass, trying to steady himself. "Can I ask you something now?" he said. Claire nodded. "Of course." "Why did you really stay?" Lucas asked. "I mean, I appreciate it, more than you know. But you didn't owe me anything. You could have walked out the second you realized what was happening." Claire considered the question, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. "I stayed because I was tired of watching people be cruel and pretending it was harmless," she said. "I stayed because you looked like someone who was drowning and needed someone to throw him a line." She met his eyes. "And I stayed because when you talked about being invisible, I recognized something in you. Something I've been trying to fight off for years." Lucas felt his throat tighten. "What's that?" "The belief that we're not worth being seen," Claire said simply. The words settled between them, heavy with shared understanding. Lucas had spent so long convincing himself that he was better off alone. The connection was just another opportunity for pain, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen by another person. Not judged, not pitied, just seen. Their food arrived, and they ate slowly, the conversation flowing more easily now. Claire told him about her work, about the challenges of designing spaces that felt human in a world that valued efficiency over beauty. Lucas talked about his daughter, about the guilt he still carried over the divorce, about how hard it was to be a good parent when you felt like a failure as a person. They talked about books and music and the small, mundane details of their lives that somehow felt significant in the telling. By the time dessert arrived, 2 hours had passed. The restaurant had filled and emptied again, the Friday night crowd moving on to bars and clubs. But Lucas and Claire remained, anchored to their table by a conversation that neither of them wanted to end. When the check finally came, Lucas reached for it instinctively, but Claire stopped him. "We'll split it," she said firmly. "This isn't a charity date, remember?" Lucas smiled, feeling something warm bloom in his chest. Fair enough. They paid and walked out into the cool night air. The street was quiet, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. Lucas stood on the sidewalk, suddenly uncertain. He didn't want the evening to end, but he didn't know how to ask for more without sounding desperate. Claire seemed to sense his hesitation. She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to him. "I'd like to do this again," she said. "Without the audience next time." Lucas took the card, his fingers brushing against hers. "I'd like that too." She smiled, then leaned in and kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Call me," she said. Then she turned and walked toward the parking garage, her heels clicking against the pavement. Lucas stood there for a long moment, watching her go. He looked down at the card in his hand, at her name printed in simple black letters. Claire Morgan. Architect. He slipped it into his pocket and started walking toward his own car, feeling lighter than he had in years. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if this was the start of something real or just a single moment of connection in an otherwise lonely life. But for the first time since his divorce, Lucas felt like he was worth knowing, worth seeing, worth the effort it took to be present in his own life. And that, he realized, was enough, at least for tonight.
This story reminds us how easy it is for people to hurt others just to feel powerful. It teaches that real strength comes from standing up for yourself and accepting that you deserve respect and love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to support our channel.